We've spent a lot of time talking about points of reference in the class and frames of reference. And this is my only funny slide in the whole presentation, which I thought I'd actually put up front and get it over and done with. And that's the sign I walk past every day. I don't know if you can see it. I took a picture of it the other night when I was meeting someone for a drink. It says, Berlin, that direction, 16,117 kilometers. And that's one way, by the way. So if I ever get lost and want to come back here, I know which way to head and I can just keep on walking. But just in terms of a real point of reference, whoops. How do I get back? There we go. I think it really came out of one of our favorite people and one of our favorite lecturers that we actually had during the time that we were here, and that was from Deepak Jain in Chicago. And his quote that I actually wrote down was really around, you need to move from success to significance. You need to think beyond business. And I think that's really the conversations that we've actually been having here over the last 18 months. What purpose do we have? Has the industry lost its relevance? How do we regain that relevance? And I think that really is quite critical in terms of being able to use this as a point of reference for the thesis topic. And that really is thinking beyond business. So what I want to really introduce is a new reality for creative industries. And when I define creative industries, I'm talking about advertising and marketing specifically. And I think part of that was actually looking outside of the industry and saying, okay, fine, where can we actually learn? Where do we actually look at other sources of creativity that are being applied in innovative ways? And for me, that was actually looking at social entrepreneurs. And we'll get down to a definition of what social entrepreneurs are later on. But the real idea that you can actually learn from social entrepreneurs, you can learn from their behaviors, their attitudes, how they actually construct ideas, how they apply creativity, and some lessons for creative industries that actually fall out of that. So the roadmap for today is really looking at our frame of reference and actually looking at it from a global context. Insights into social entrepreneurs, so into the businesses that they set up, the attitudes that they have, the behaviors they actually demonstrate. And then from there, just a framework around building a sustainable creative enterprise. So develop both a process and approach in terms of developing a sustainable creative enterprise and the ideas that go around it, and then some conclusions as well. So the frame of reference, we've had a lot of discussions around the global context and how that's actually shifting. So I've actually looked at 5 macro trends and put them into buckets. And I think the first one that I think we're all quite aware of is really around the democratization of technology. And that's really around the ubiquity of technology being everywhere. I think if you look at some of the penetration rates, particularly even for mobile handsets in Africa, in 2012, it's going to be over 50 to 55%. And that's in a market that I think a lot of people wouldn't have even considered a market even 5 or 6 years ago. The quote from Eric Schmidt of Google basically saying the internet is the first thing that humanity has had that humanity doesn't understand is a really nice articulation of the anarchy that's actually going on out there, and perhaps some of the things we don't understand about the applications of the internet and the technology as well. Power shift to the individual, and I think Sunil touched on this a little bit in terms of actually talking around media, talking about the influence of advertising. Nielsen issued a report last year saying that I think they did a scan of all social media. And the first word that's actually associated to advertising is the word false. So there again, advertising is losing its relevance. It's shifting down to the individuals. Sunil touched on that again in terms of just even word-of-mouth sites. TripAdvisor, Sean's favorite friend, Jeff Jarvis, in terms of actually getting blogs on there with BuzzMachine and being able to actually impact corporations. It really is shifting down to the individual, and individual actually can have a huge impact on an organization and on a larger scale. Now, number 3 I thought was quite interesting, and I'm calling it egalitarian creativity. And if you look at the speed at how ideas move now, if you look at the ability for technology to actually help people create, that's now in the hands of billions. If you see some of the genres that are actually coming out in terms of creativity, we had a look at one on YouTube the other day where people are taking videos and doing literal translations of videos. Thank you again, Sunil. So again, people are actually absorbing the creative process. They're owning the creative process. They're owning the ideas and actually reinterpreting these ideas for their own use. They're reinterpreting the ideas to actually distribute to their friends and to a larger network as well. Macro trend number 4, and this is what I'm calling this the superhighway to self-realization. So sort of looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying, with equality in terms of economic distribution of wealth, if you look at the way people are actually fulfilling the basics and moving up that hierarchy of needs, technology is really enabling people to actually become much more well-informed. Things like the $100 laptop for every child, as well as an ability to actually get that technology into people's hands. The connectivity and the relationships, and we'll touch on some of that and apply this back to how I actually looked at social enterprises as well. And I think macro trend number 5, and this is probably impacting more of what we're calling the bottom of the economic pyramid. I think what's happening now, there's a lot of questions around how that bottom of the economic pyramid is going to become economically sustainable. Corporations are actually recognizing that as a huge opportunity. If you look at someone like HP, they've recognized that 80% of the world's population earns less than $10 a day, and if they can actually tap into that and earn $1 from each of these people in a year, that's a huge opportunity for them. Economic aid is being reinvented, so that's being put under question. People are actually realizing that empowering individuals at the bottom of the economic period with entrepreneurial skills is actually the way to go. So these changes are happening, and they might not be happening in our specific markets, but they're happening in other markets where there's a greater need. So what I've actually looked at is said, here is the macro context that's actually providing these shifts and trends for advertising, for media, for social entrepreneurs. It's basically just this huge shifting sands environment that's happening out there. And then looked at social entrepreneurs, and I think really trying to define them and put a little bit of context into why I think it's actually important to highlight this as a group that we can actually learn from. And I think the bottom bit really encapsulates that, and that's really being able to solve the problem by changing the system, spreading the solution, and persuading entire societies to take new leaps. Now, this definition is from Ashoka, which is actually a membership, fellowship-based organization of social entrepreneurs based in the States. And I thought that was actually quite nice in terms of how I did encapsulate that feeling of social entrepreneurs. Because it's not just about incremental change. It's actually changing people's beliefs. It's changing people's ideas about societies, and it's actually persuading people to take new leaps and actually take them into areas they never thought they'd be able to go into before. So why social entrepreneurs? I think they're able to actually create a profit while fulfilling a social need, and I thought that was actually quite critical, especially a lot of the discussions that we've been having in class as well. They operate outside the context of traditional corporate businesses, and that kind of touches on what we were talking about earlier around CSR, around how global organizations actually operate. And they do operate actually over and above the traditional legal frameworks and frameworks of countries and nations. And these entrepreneurs operate in the same way as well. They're able to actually instigate broader social change through their innovation, so it's not minor changes, it's actually quite major changes as well. And they're driving innovation through applying creativity to social problems. So the recognition of a social need and then being able to actually look at an innovative solution to solve that problem. Now, the groups that I actually looked at fall into 3 groups. I think there's a preconception that social entrepreneurs basically only work in poor countries, they only work in Africa, they only work in India. But when I actually did a bit of a cross-section around them, I defined them into 3 different groups. And again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I basically said there's 3 types of social entrepreneurs and social enterprises. There's the ones that we're all familiar with that actually fill the bottom of the pyramid, which are really around the economic gap enterprises. So the ones that are working in developing markets, they are providing the basic needs and fulfilling basic needs for a lot of the population. The ones at the top are ones that I'm calling values gap enterprises. So the ones that actually exist in the developed market but really are not fulfilling basic needs anymore because those basic needs are being fulfilled or they're being fulfilled through institutions. But it's more of an ethical need. So there's a gap that exists in the market that they're fulfilling. And the ones in between I'm calling the bridging enterprises. So the ones that actually work across the two types of markets. The 6 that I looked at, and I'll just skim over them briefly because it's in more detail in the thesis as well. There's a few that we might be familiar with. I mean, Grameen Bank out of Bangladesh was really the first in terms of micro-lending. But if you really look at what they actually accomplished, that was really empowering women to go out and be able to, number one, take control of their lives through financial empowerment. So it wasn't just about lending people $10 or $20. It was actually really providing financial literacy to them and actually having them feel empowered to make their decisions on their own. Wizit is actually a mobile phone banking system in South Africa. So what they've actually done is tapped into underbanked and unbanked populations in South Africa to provide bank transfers, deposits, and a way of actually providing almost a mobile banking system. The ones at the top, I think American Apparel, I started looking at them before they had a little bit of a crisis. There's a bit of a caveat around that. But the whole idea that they were able to actually go in and fulfill a values gap around an ethical fashion by actually manufacturing in Los Angeles. And the other one I've looked at is actually Yak Bank, which, well, for all intents and purposes, is actually a Swedish bank. And what they've actually assessed is they've determined that, and they did actually an economic study in Germany where they said 80% of the population actually provides the economic wealth for 10% through interest payments. So what they've actually constructed is a banking system in Sweden that actually doesn't depend on interest. So they've actually eradicated interest as an economic tool for banks. The ones in the middle might be a bit more familiar with as well. Fair trade, in terms of a brand in the UK that actually endorses products from developing markets into developed markets. And Kiva, which is more of an entrepreneurial micro-lending thing that directly connects consumers in developing, or entrepreneurs in developing markets with consumers in developed markets. And I think when I actually went through these, there's commonalities that actually started to appear in terms of what the behaviors were. And I kind of thought, okay, I think we can actually take some of those commonalities and apply them to how creative industries could actually operate and start to come up with some almost parameters around an ethos for creative industries. And the way I started to group them went back to Module 1 with a very exciting Paul Verdun. Thank you. And he spoke really around his value model around value creation, value capture, and sustaining value. And I thought that was actually quite critical to put it in a context of how these people operate, how these people behave, and start to come up with some an ethos or some principles around social entrepreneur behavior. So I think the first one I put under value creation was really they're able to understand the rules and actually make new ones. So they understand the infrastructure. They understand that there are certain parameters that they need to work within, but they say, hang on here, these are rules right now, but we're going to go in and we're going to change them. So these rules no longer exist. I'm going to actually set a new set of rules. We're going to establish new parameters, and we're actually going to go in and operate under a new system or a new set of rules. Another one under value creation was really around social needs take priority over profit. And that is so just contradictory to, I think, anything you would learn in a traditional MBA class. It's so counterintuitive. But I think by placing a social need first, what they were able to do was actually provide a higher purpose for these organizations, provide a higher purpose for all their stakeholders, and ultimately profit actually did follow. Value creation, the empowerment of individuals, going back to Grameen Bank again, they were able to actually go in and empower women. And they not only go in and provide financial literacy, they actually go in and help families prioritize how they spend their funds. So it's around education, it's around healthcare, it's around sanitation. So it's a lot more than actually just going in and providing a service. It's actually going in and being able to actually empower these individuals through education, through providing them with a sense of purpose. How do they capture value? They develop pretty pragmatic solutions. So, it's not anything which is really esoteric. It's pretty fundamental to how people want to operate. It's pretty fundamental to developing and giving them a practical solution. They're able to create new markets. So they're able to go in and, for example, Visit in South Africa went in and actually looked at serving the unbanked and what they call unbanked and underbanked population as well. So banking markets that traditional banks wouldn't actually ever look at, but they would actually go in and say, okay, fine, these people still need a service. They still need some type of financial interaction, financial transaction capability, and we're able to create a new market in South Africa as well. This one's a bit of a tough one, but they're able to measure value based on intangibles. So, we talk about, triple bottom line reporting. We talk about all different ways of actually measuring these intangibles. But they're looking at really providing a social benefit. They're looking at contribution back to the community. They're looking at contribution back to the country as well. So it's not just about generating a monetary profit or a monetary return. It really is actually putting a measurement around some of the intangibles that they can contribute. How do they sustain value as well? They drive ownership and accountability across all stakeholders. So everyone gets involved. A A lot of the models that I looked at, multiple employees actually were stakeholders in the organization. Things like fair trade, there's a vested interest in the producers actually getting involved in the brand as well. So there's really a sense of ownership and accountability that cuts across these organizations, and I think that was critical in terms of them being able to sustain the value. One that I thought was quite important as well was they're not just about going in and providing a product or a service, but they're really fundamentally changing institutionalized beliefs. So they're being able to actually go into a market like Bangladesh and say, okay, fine, women are not considered to be they're not considered to be sort of at the cutting edge when it comes to leading societies in Bangladesh. So, they're able to go in and change how society actually views women, just even through empowering them financially. So it's not just about going in again and providing a product or a service. It's actually really changing institutionalized beliefs. And I thought this one was actually quite important. Some of the success measures that they actually use is around replication of their idea. So they don't own the idea. They don't actually possess the idea. If the idea actually goes out and it's replicated 100 times, that's something they actually look at as being something which is a success metric for them. So again, it's this idea of not owning the intellectual property, not owning necessarily the model, but actually letting the idea free and letting that idea replicate, whether it be in their own market, whether it be into multiple markets. And that really is another success criteria for this group as well. What I wanted to do is actually take these 12 pointers and actually provide a framework for a creative enterprise. And I was able to distill it down to, I think, 3 key drivers. And it was saying, okay, fine, what is actually going to build a sustainable creative enterprise? And that's really around creating sustainable ideas. And the 3 drivers that I was really looking at were really around purpose, being able to actually provide meaning to people, being able to provide, I think, a higher purpose around engagement with an idea. Participation is really around the number of people that are participating. So is it around the numbers? Is it around a set of numbers within a target market, within a defined area? And really the third one is really around inspiration. So going back to how social entrepreneurs are able to go in and change institutionalized beliefs, that's really what I looked at as being a core driver of being able to create sustainable ideas. What I've done here is put it in a bit of a model to actually say, okay, fine, if we look at purpose-driven participation, that really is around giving people meaning to how they actually participate. And the bottom axis is really around inspiration, so actually being able to institutionalize and change ideas. And then I looked at stages of inspiration to say it's not just going to go from 0 to 60 overnight, but there's actually going to be six stages that carry you along how ideas actually develop. I think the first stage is really just based on an insight, and I think we all work on insights in our industry as well. So it's actually seeing something a little bit differently. It's being able to actually go in and have a bit of a different point of view, being able to actually recognize a need that no one else has actually recognized before. Incubation is really the stage of actually the idea development, so it's still at its embryonic stage. It may not have a high degree of participation, there may not be a lot of people involved, but it's really where that idea is actually starting to develop and germinate. The third one is really around innovation. That's when other people actually start to own the idea and develop it for their own purposes. So if we look at the IDEO example that we looked at in class a year ago now, they really were around innovation. So taking something like a shopping cart and being able to reinvent it for different purposes or different functions. Here's where it starts to get a little bit more interesting, and that's really around influence. And I think Sunil touched on that before in terms of being able to use social media, in terms of actually being able to almost let the idea go and having it actually influence a larger sphere of people. And then does it have impact? Is it actually starting to change how people think? Is it starting to change what they believe? Is it starting to change institutionalized beliefs? And then what I'm calling integration, this isn't marketing integration. This is fundamentally, has that idea actually sunk its teeth into society, so to say? Has it actually really changed how people feel? Has it changed how people actually think about women? Does it change how people think about lending when it comes to banks and financial services? Is it a fundamental change that's actually going on in how people believe and in their belief system as well? I love that. I sort of looked at it and said, okay, fine, there's probably four what I'm calling idea archetypes. And the first one's really the greenhouse archetype, and that's where all ideas start. Some of them don't leave there. Some of them just end up languishing there in the corner. But that's really where ideas start, and they actually start to germinate. The second one I looked at was really the inert type, and that's really where you have a low degree of participation, but you have a high degree of integration. So it might be an idea which, the example I used in the thesis is really around government propaganda. So you actually have an idea that is enforced upon a group of people. So they're forced to actually participate, but it's not really fundamentally changing their beliefs. The infamy archetype, I think this is where advertising and media actually operates quite a bit, because they want to look for the infamous ideas. They actually do have a degree of innovation, not so much influence, and might not actually have a lot of longevity in the idea as well. And here's sort of what I'm calling the ripe space for ideas, and that's really around the monumental archetype. And that's really ideas that really go in and change people's beliefs. They change ways societies behave. They integrate into how people think and behave, and actually integrate into people's value system. And they also have a high degree of participation as well. So coincidentally, they all start with I along the bottom, so I've just called it the pie model for simplicity's sake. And that's really an idea for how you actually develop ideas, a model to actually look at the ability to move ideas along that process as well, and something you can actually look at in terms of being able to measure creativity, I think, at the same time. So how do we apply this to creative industries? What I did was actually looked at how that might apply to social enterprises, and started to actually graph where the social enterprises stood that I looked at, and there were 6 of them there. And it was really around, have these enterprises and these ideas been able to actually change beliefs? So they've been able to actually institutionalize new values into a society? And has there been a high degree of participation? So a lot of those ideas actually sit up in the monumental archetype in terms of being able to really fundamentally change society's beliefs and value system. And then I sort of looked at where traditional advertising and media operates. And I think they sort of start at the insight level and kind of get up to the innovation and influence level, but really don't have a high degree of longevity around the ideas. They're not really going in and actually being able to change people's belief system. They're not being able to actually go in and change the way society behaves. So I think part of the recommendation here is to say, okay, fine, in terms of a bigger purpose for traditional advertising and media agencies, it's really just being able to shift that trajectory, being able to actually, have a higher purpose of being able to actually come up with ideas that fundamentally change a society set of values, that actually are able to institutionalize a new set of beliefs. And part of that was actually going back and just looking at 3 examples of winning work that's already there, and that was really around the Obama Change campaign, which won the Titanium at Cannes this year. There was Bashar's campaign, the Katie Castor campaign, which was really going in and being able to actually change how women are perceived in Lebanon. So if you just take this as a market for Lebanon, you could actually say, yeah, it's beginning to actually change how people are interacting with women, with their perceptions with women, and there's a high degree of participation as well. And the Zimbabwean, which is another campaign that won at Cannes this year, which is really changing the way that people interacted with Zimbabwe by using banknotes outside of Zimbabwe to communicate the inefficiency of the government. So I think what this tries to do is actually say, we're already heading in this direction. I don't think those campaigns would have actually been there last year, but I think right now there's a greater social, if you want to call it, movement to actually put forward ideas that are societal changing and actually really change people's beliefs and behaviors. So out of this, some of the conclusions, I think a new evaluation framework for creativity is required. So the one I put forward is actually a way to reevaluate creative ideas and reevaluate how creativity is actually measured. Profit and creating a socially beneficial enterprise are not mutually exclusive. So, we can be coming up with ideas that, number one, do provide a social benefit. I mean, this came up with Dentsu in Japan. Their context, regardless of whether it's to provide a cleaner street by cleaning the urinals in Tokyo or, creating new fly swatters, there's always a greater social purpose in terms of what they're doing, and profit can actually be generated out of that as well. Participation, purpose, and influence equals sustainability and profit. So those 3 key drivers in terms of being able to actually drive sustainable ideas, drive societal change, I think, is one way that actually can create profit as well. Profit doesn't have to be the key driver. It can be delivering on a social need as a primary driver, and then profit will follow. The idea here that social ideas with purpose are a new currency. So in terms of actually going out and being able to change how people behave, being able to actually, again, institutionalize new ideas, I think that's an undercurrent that's actually coming up to the forefront with some of the macro trends that we spoke about earlier. And I think the last one, just in terms of all enterprises will soon need to become social enterprises. So all enterprises are going to have some type of larger social purpose. There's going to have to be a greater need for them to actually fulfill. And sooner or later, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're all going to be working for a social enterprise. And that's the end.